Hello and welcome. If you would like to skip the intro and go straight to the lesson, go to this timestamp. With several servers running Simple Radio Standalone or SRS, I think it's time that we try to bring in more people who are currently too afraid to talk on the radios. Whether it's because they don't know the terminology or perhaps they may be too afraid to make a mistake while talking, I do believe that we finally need to get these people on board and enjoy the radio along with the rest of us. That said, the following is split into several segments that will cover what you need to know in order to get going on these servers regarding radio brevity. The first video will be on airfield procedures, while the second will be on communicating with the AWACS. We will see if a third video is needed for communicating effectively with your wingman. So let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see that one. Before we get started, I do need to put out a quick little disclaimer. This video is only meant as an easy introduction to talk on the radio with leniency in mind. I do not claim to be an expert in this field by any stretch of the imagination, and to be frank, there will be several areas that may make real pilots cringe when someone lightly misuses certain terms, or adds and removes words from a particular radio callout. If you find yourself to be one of those people, then you are partly responsible for scaring away some of the potential sim pilots who make simple radio mistakes by not saying a sentence exactly as it is listed in the manuals. You see, the thing is that we're not trying to pass an FAA licensing exam here. We're trying to introduce a simple and sometimes casual radio brevity to beginners who feel intimidated to even try and talk on the radios because of sticklers like you. So you will need to ease up on how strict you feel about some of the terminology that we are going to use here. So the goal here is to make sure that we can introduce these new people to communicate with us in a somewhat organized, albeit casual fashion. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get started. I'm going to assume that you have SRS already installed and mapped out, and you can find instructions on how to do that all over the web. I'll try to post some links in the description. Next, we need to choose our call sign. If I'm flying by myself, I might just leave it as ralfidude. But if I'm flying with friends and are in a package, it makes life a lot easier for the GCI if you make a package name. This makes it easier for the GCI to identify who is flying in your group. For demonstration purposes, I will make my package name Hentai34.
Oh, yeah!
I may have gone too far in a few places.
And if you had a buddy, he would make his Hentai35 and his actual call sign after that package name, and so on and so forth. Now, please do not use the generic names that you will find automatically generated by DCS when you join a multiplayer server, such as Colt11, Uzi12. Those are generated depending on the slot that you join, but are not visible to the GCI when he's trying to find you. He will only see the name that you typed in the multiplayer screen.
Okie dokie. So now that you've joined a server, you'll more than likely select a spawn point, which will be a Napa, at least on a server like this, which is Georgia at War. Now, you do have a service called ATIS that is at your service. ATIS stands for Automatic Terminal Information Service, and all it really is like a radio station that plays a loop of information about the airfield that you're in. When you tune to the frequency of the ATIS, you will notice that it's not going to start right away at the very beginning because it's playing on that loop, so you might catch it in the middle or the end. So we're going to tune to that frequency and just listen through the entire thing from beginning to end. Now, in order to get the frequencies, it is always a good idea to hit escape, go to briefing, and read through the briefing. Especially on a server like God that we're in, all of the information is there. The ATIS information for all of the airfields that you should be interested in are here. Since we're in an APA, the ATIS information will be at 249er. So let's go ahead and jot that down. Additionally, you have the objective information set up right here, and then the comms frequencies right over here. The ones that we're interested in is the ATC field traffic at 2495. This is what we're going to be using to communicate on air traffic, unless you're doing carrier operations, in which case you would be in this frequency. The common is kind of like the guard frequency, so this is where everybody's sitting at if they're not tuned into anywhere specific. And then you have a choice of the AI AWACS or the human AWACS. If there's a human AWACS, always connect to that first at 134, but we're going to get to that at a later lesson. In any case, once you have all these frequencies written down, let's go ahead and look at the ATIS at 249. I'm going to go ahead and switch this to the manual. Then I'm going to change this to 249.
or 1009er. End information Charlie. This is an Napa Vijayzevo information Charlie. Runway in use is 04. Wind 040 at 5 knots. Visibility 43. Temperature 17.7 Celsius. Altimeter 29996. Remarks 1014 hectopascal. QFE 2981 or 1009er. End information Charlie. This is a Napa.
Okay, so we're done with that frequency. We're going to go ahead and get off of it. So, there was a lot of information that was just given to you, and I have it all listed on the left-hand side here. Now, we don't really need to know any of this. The one thing that you're going to get out of ATIS, if there's anything that you're going to learn here, is the runway that is in use. The active runway was mentioned was 04. This is extremely important. If we hit the F10 map, we are currently in a Napa, and if I hit this little check mark up here, we can just zoom straight to where we are. So we're in a Napa, and as you can see, we have two different directions that we can take off from. We have runway 22 and runway 04. So 04 is the current active runway, which is this way. So we will have to land and take off from here, as this is our active runway. So do not take off from 22. Now, this is basically, at least on this server, almost always going to be 04. However, from time to time, the winds do change, and when they change, the active runway might change to 22. This happens, and it's a good idea just to tune to the ATIS frequency here or there, just to see if there's any change. But since we're okay, we're going to be taking off 04. Now I know which way I'm going to need to taxi in order to get to the runway. I'm right here, so I'm just going to make a right, head all the way down this taxiway, hold short, and when I reach this area over here, holding short of the runway, that is when I'm going to make my very first radio transmission.
There are some people who tend to get a little bit crazy with coming over the ATC Freak and start blasting it with information about your taxi instructions.
Napa traffic, this is Hente 34. I have one soul on board, 8,000 pounds of fuel, and a full load out of harms. Gonna be taxiing out of apron 32 for runway 4, via Alpha, Bravo, Echo, Charlie, back to Bravo, then Delta, and Napa.
I'm sorry, but this isn't real life, and nobody on the frequency is scrambling for their maps whenever someone is going off tangent and describing which taxi routes they're taking to see if there's any conflict with their own routes. It just doesn't happen. So, at that point, those people are just cluttering up comms with unnecessary information. Don't be that guy. Now, what you may find is that sometimes a GCI will double up as an airfield traffic controller, and you may hear something like this.
Colt 5-1, you're clear for taxi via Mike Alpha, hold short 04.
Roger, taxi via Mike Alpha, hold short.
This is a rare occurrence, and honestly, not something you need to worry about. You don't need to request clearances or anything like that, so just skip all this and taxi on the runway. Because we are in an uncontrolled airfield, it does mean that we need to look out for each other. So just follow road rules wherever they apply. Give way where it should be given, and you will not see a conflict develop on the taxiway.
Alright, so now we're holding short of runway 04. Now what I need to do is to know exactly where I'm going to head after I take off. So as we're currently over here, we're going to make a left onto the runway and we're going to take off. The action is going to be to the east for this server. So I'm going to take off and head straight east, and right over here is going to be where all of this stuff happens. So my departure will be due east. So we're going to keep that in our minds. Now the way radio transmissions work is extremely simple. There's 3 key things that you need to do. Step 1, who the fuck are you talking to? Step 2, who the fuck are you? Step 3, what the fuck do you want? So for step 1, we are talking to the Napa traffic. Remember, there is no tower. There's no actual physical person on the radios who's going to give us clearances. Notice that up to this point, we haven't contacted anyone and requested permission to taxi to the runway or anything like that. So we are doing this on our own, and we're just transmitting between each other within this airfield. So the very first transmission you're going to make is basically over here right before you take off. Okay, so we have Napa traffic. Now, who are we? Well, we are Hentai34. That is my call sign. And what the fuck do we want? Well, we're gonna say that we are taking the active and we're gonna take off from runway 4. And then it is also very nice to say which way we are going to depart. So we're gonna head east, which is basically down that way. We're gonna make a right-hand turn. And just to give people a fair good idea of what your intentions are after takeoff, it's good to also let them know which way you're going to turn after you take off so they don't get mixed up. And if there's anybody in the flight pattern, they can be looking out for you as you take off. So I would transmit over 2495 since I'm currently still tuned to that frequency, and I would say the following. ANAPA traffic, Hentai34 taking the active runway 4 for an east departure, ANAPA traffic. And we're going to take a look around. We're going to make sure that there's nobody else in the pattern, because sometimes there's some people who just aren't on SRS, and they might not necessarily hear you. And let's go ahead and take off. Oh, and by the way, if you weren't going to make a left or right-hand turn, and you were just going to take off and fly along the runway heading of 040, you would say for a straight-out departure. Just FYI. Now, notice that I said ANAPA traffic at the very end. This is not necessary, but it is a courtesy. The reason why is that sometimes people will tune to the frequency at the very last minute. Maybe they forgot and they just barely tuned to the frequency when they heard you talking. Or maybe they weren't paying attention because they were talking to your friend and they only caught the very last bit of your transmission. And because they weren't paying attention to the very beginning of the transmission when you said ANAPA traffic, they might not necessarily know that it was ANAPA traffic that you were talking to. Because remember, when you're on 2495, this isn't the frequency just for ANAPA back here. This is for every single airfield that you're going to be landing or taking off from. So that is the frequency we're going to be on for Krasnodar Center, Krasnodar Peshkovsky, as well as these two down here. So it is a very good idea to go ahead and repeat which airfield you were talking about when you were transmitting, which is why I said ANAPA traffic at the very end. That way, if they missed the very beginning, at least they'll know exactly which traffic you were talking about if they caught the very end of your transmission. Now, it's not necessary, but after you've left about 10 miles away from the airfield, it is also courteous to let people know who are still on the frequency that you are out of their airspace and they don't have to worry about you. And this would sound something along the lines of, ANAPA traffic, last call for Hentai34, ANAPA traffic. And this is a last call, just kind of like a goodbye, I'm out of your airspace, don't worry about me. And at this point, I would change my frequency over to whatever I want, whether it's an in-flight frequency between my wingman or 253, whatever you want. You no longer are responsible for anything else as far as the ATC frequency goes. Okay, so let's talk about coming back into the airfield. So when you're coming back, you need to be tuned to the frequency of the ATC, which is 2495 yet again, just before you enter 10 miles. Now, it is very courteous as well not to just tune to the frequency of 2495 and immediately key the mic and start talking. This is because there could be a conversation going on between other people. So before you step on their comms, just listen. And if you hear dead air, you can go ahead and start speaking. Unfortunately, when it comes to pattern work, you are going to need to know what the different patterns are called, like downwind, upwind, crosswind, base, and all of that jazz. I have a picture over here to describe how all of this works, and I will keep that up while we're doing the pattern work for this airfield. The other thing that was very important in the ATIS that you may or may not need is the QFE information that was given at the very end of the ATIS report in the remarks section. If you recall, the ATIS said that our QFE for ANAPA traffic was 2981. Now, because we will typically take off from ANAPA and we will fly east, engage some targets, and then if we survive, we want to rearm and reload, we will not fly all the way back to ANAPA. We would more than likely fly to Krasnodar Peshkovsky or Krasnodar Center. So, we don't really need the QFE for ANAPA because we will not be coming back there. Now, the reason why you want to tune to the QFE for the specific airfield is so that as soon as your wheels touch down, your altimeter should read 0. Instead, we are at the standard pressure of 29902 by default. So the QFE here is going to be different than the QFE up here. So if I was to come back and land in Krasnoprashkovsky or Krasnodar Center, I would need to tune to the ATIS for those two airfields, whichever one I'm landing at, and listen to the remarks section to check what the QFE is. And that's if I want to change my pressure setting over here so that when I land, it says 0 on the altimeter gauge. Now, since we're coming back to a Napa back here, I'm going to tune my QFE to 29981. Boom, just like that. Okie dokie. Now I need to start planning out exactly how I'm going to approach this. You know, there's a standard way of doing pattern landings at 45-degree angles and all of that nonsense, but remember, this isn't real life. We're doing this in an easy way. No one's doing any standard aviation stuff over here. Instead of coming into a Napa, because we are over here, and we're coming into a Napa, we would normally enter it at a 45-degree angle, go on the downwind, then base leg, and then final onto runway 04. Remember, that is our active runway. But what we're going to do instead, we're just going to enter a long base, and then we're going to enter a final. Because we don't care. And if we were coming from the east, it would be the same thing. Either I can loop around and enter a downwind base, then final, or I could go from here and enter a right base, and then final. It is worthy to note that the standard pattern is to the left, counterclockwise. So when you say downwind or base, it is generally understood that you mean left downwind and left base. If, however, you're going to do a non-standard approach and come in from the right-hand pattern, you should definitely say right downwind and right base. So be sure that you do mention that. But now, see, I'm way too high and I want to approach this in a somewhat reasonable manner. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fly down towards the airfield and I'm going to do an overhead brake. So let's go ahead and use the same 3-step radio procedure that we used earlier. ANAPA traffic, Hentec 34 is entering an overhead brake for runway 04, approaching from the south, ANAPA traffic. So I let him know exactly what my intentions are, I let him know where I'm coming from, and now people should understand that I'm coming in for an overhead brake right over the runway. And obviously make sure that you check all around you. There's nobody else that's over here, you don't want to be flying into them. And let's go ahead and brake. ANAPA traffic, Hentec 34 is downwind for runway 4. ANAPA traffic. ANAPA traffic, Hentec 34 is on left base for runway 4. ANAPA. Okay, now instead of calling final, this is going to be a very short final. So we're going to call it short final, and this lets people know that you're very close. And ANAPA traffic, Hentec 34 is on a short final runway 4, ANAPA. Now, this isn't supposed to be a video showcasing how to do a proper landing or proper pattern altitudes or anything like that. I'm doing this on the fly, so forgive me. This looks terrible, but
Yeah, radio check.
good check. And obviously, make sure that there is nobody else here that's coming in for a takeoff, so you're not coming into it. You're not going into anybody. And that's about it. Bada bing, bada boom. And that guy just asked for a radio check just to make sure that he's coming in over the frequency, and you give him a good check or a 5x5, whatever you please. You don't need to be crazy about the procedures for radio comms that you use. Now, as I made my left turn out of the airfield, you'll notice that there is another aircraft right behind me who held short of the runway and waited for me to get off the runway. Now, the thing about this airfield is that there is a small possibility that you may end up actually spawning over here. And you'll notice that the active runway is 04, so you can't take off from runway 22. It's extremely frowned upon. So what you would need to do is taxi out and cross runway 22, and then head all the way down and then take off from runway 04. Which, yes, it is a bit of a pain in the butt, but that is the proper way of doing it. And if you don't want to piss off people on the runway that are taking off from the opposite direction, then, you know, that's just the way of doing it. So in that instance, you would hold short like that guy is doing, and if you wanted to cross, you would wait until it's completely clear, no one's taking off, no one's in your way, and you would just call in ANAPA traffic, Hentei 34, crossing runway 22. And then you would cross, just like that guy did, and then make your way down to runway 04. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and head over and land at Krimsk now. So Krimsk is over here. More than likely, the way I'm going to have to land is from right to left, so I'm not 100% sure. Let's check the ATIS. 248.
Visibility 43. Temperature 17.9 Celsius. Altimeter 2996. Remarks 1014 hectopascal. QFE 2989 or 1012. End information Delta.
Alright.
This is Krimsk information Delta. Runway in use is 04. Wind 040 at 5 knots.
And the runway in use is 04. We have our QFE set, so that when I touch down, my altimeter will say 0. And we are going to approach this since we are here at a nice 45-degree angle. Go downwind, base, final. And we've confirmed that the runway 04 is on the right, so I'm going to be landing right to left. So that's also good to know and confirm. And Krimsk traffic, Hentei 34, is coming in for landing on runway 4, looking to enter the pattern on a left downwind.
Krimsk traffic, Hawk 61 on right base for runway 04.
Krimsk traffic, Hentei 34, is going to be on a extended left downwind. I'll slot in right behind you. I have traffic in sight. Alright, so what happened is this guy is coming in. He kind of squeezes his ass in here, but that's okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to appease him by extending our downwind longer than we normally would because he's already on base.
Krimsk traffic, Hawk 61 turning on final, runway 04.
And there's our final guy, and we're going to slot in right behind him. Krimsk traffic, Hentei 34 is on left base for runway 4, Krimsk. There should be enough time for him to get out of the way. And I see him right there, he's on a very short final. As long as we don't speed up, we should have just enough time to get out of his way. And if you don't feel comfortable, if you feel like you're not going to make it, then it's always a good idea to just go around or enter the pattern and try again in a little bit. But this guy just landed, he should be out of the way in a bit, and I'm in a nice little setup here. Krimsk traffic, Hentei 34 is short final for runway 4, Krimsk traffic.
Krimsk traffic, Hawk 61 cleared the active.
And he just let us know that he's off that runway, and you can see him off going to the right there. And there we go. Touchdown. Krimsk traffic, Hentei 34 is off the active. Krimsk. And this just lets people know that you're out of the way. You're not going to be a problem. And that's it. You are not responsible for anything else at this point. You are basically done. So to give you a visual representation of what happened, my plan was to go left downwind, turn left base, turn final. Unfortunately, the A-10 cut in, and he was already on right base, so I changed my plan and I extended my left downwind to give him a little bit of room so he can make his final and land. Then I would slot in on left base, final, and then leave just enough space where it would be safe for me to land behind him. So we made some pretty good progress. We had a nice little dynamic situation happen, and we overcame it. And as you saw, we didn't use some overcomplicated lingo or anything like that. And often is the case, you can just literally talk to people and it's fine. As long as you're able to clearly communicate with one another, you are going to be absolutely a-okay. Anyway, I do hope that you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in part 2 where we will talk about talking to the AWACS or GCI.